cloud. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
there it
record
is.
everything at this point.
Okay.
Okay, so I have someone that's coming on. Here. This point. Okay. Just saw David Harper, but maybe he disconnected himself. Right now. Basically ready.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Myself here. David,
Yes.
I realize that once the presentation comes, I won't be able to, I can't add anything to the chat. I can't.
No, that's what I
So-
said. I will keep an eye on the chat for you. And
Okay,
I will
and then,
make sure that everything gets added back and cut and paste when I can.
okay then. And then, of course, the Tomas is, he will look at questions as well. Who is this? Fine. Hello, who's Carrot Ed?
It's me. I'm
Who's
here.
me? Who's me?
Oh, one moment, please. Let me.
Are you one of the presenters?
Oh. Mm. Oh.
Hello, Reverend Davis Jones. How are you?
Excuse me, excuse me.
I'm wonderful. How are you? Thank you.
I can see.
Thank
The
you.
screen.
I'm gonna mute you, Ms. Carrot Ed. Okay. Thank you so much. Reverend Ardrell,
Yes, hi.
when you are going to your slide, you're going to be introduced by our moderator, Arthur Mondale.
Yes.
And when he introduces you, your slide is going to come up first. And there's going to be 6 seconds of music and 3 seconds of applause. So then you can begin after that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
It's a pleasure meeting you. And thank you so much. We'll do more things together.
Oh, yes, I have a list.
Hey, Sulan, I'm on.
Okay, Tomas, I'm going to make you a co-host.
10-4.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone that's on the call.
Good evening, sir.
David Reese is with Land Infotech. And Reverend Ardrell is a part of our program and everyone else is listening in.
Sulan, you're echoing. So what do you have going on? You have 2 mics on or something?
No, that's someone else in the office.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Tomas and David, at 5:15, I will begin to play the background music. Between 5 o'clock and 5:15 is when most guests are, not guests, our panel and guest speaker will come on.
Okay.
So I don't want to play the music because I won't be able to check their lighting. So I just let a few people on. One more thing, Tomas. Tomas,
Yes, Sulan.
once the presentation starts, I will not be able to add anything into the chat because I'm controlling the presentation. So,
I'm monitoring the chat. I'll be fine.
okay, and David as well, but of course, the questions and of course, the number of people will be able to talk. So,
All right. So remember, we need to remind everyone logging in once the program starts to place their name and where they're coming from. We cannot forget that.
okay, so let's, yes, just a moment. Okay, let's put that in the chat. Good evening, everyone. Our program will start at about 5:29. Thank you for being patient.
Turn that light off. Let me see how I look. Can't believe I had to speak on. I didn't even get me a drink.
You recording already?
Good evening, JR. I believe Sulan is recording, yes.
But she's recording this part already? I assume they'll edit it out if they're going to
I
Make
believe she will.
public distribution. How have you been?
I'm doing well, my brother. How are you?
Extremely busy, but busy is a good thing.
Listen, thank you so much for your continued support and always rising to the occasion when we need a hand. But this message this evening is not only relevant, applicable, but most needed. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's absolutely a pleasure. Always a pleasure working with you all at the Urban League as well. And we're looking forward to even greater partnerships and things to be able to do as we address these issues.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Reverend Audrell, I see you there.
How are you, Reverend Thickland?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I had to go and email myself the link. I couldn't find it all of a sudden. So,
Oh, my goodness.
yeah, so I became a little concerned there for a second.
Yes, we get busy and do things in such a hasty manner sometimes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to
Salon, can you hear me?
Yes, Patrick, I can hear you.
Good. Can you see me?
I cannot. Your camera's off.
I gotta switch to the right original. All right, let me switch to the right camera. Hmm. Okay. There we go.
Arthur Mondell, can you give me a test? Arthur, can you give me a test? 1, 2, 3, please?
Can you hear me or no?
Yes. Perfect, perfect.
I like when I can hear y'all when I have my earbuds in. I'm trying to see why that sometimes doesn't like to do it.
Okay, so we can't hear you.
Makes it hard. Okay.
Okay, can hear you now. Excuse me, is Shay Spencer here?
No, Shalon, Shay hasn't come on yet.
Sabrina Harris. The 3 panelists are not on. Good evening, everyone. Our program will begin shortly. Sabrina Harris, can you give me a test, please? Testing, 1, 2, 3, please.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Are all the panelists here?
We're missing Shay Spencer. Is Shay here yet? Detective Harper?
Neither of them are here.
Robert Zergott. Can you hear me?
Yes, is this Detective Harper?
Yeah, Robert Zergott.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, how are you?
Great, thank you. Are you with Pbso, sir?
No, I'm Urban League.
Okay, thank you.
Urban League of Palm Beach County, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Come on, Shay just came in.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Shay. Can we see your lighting and your, turn on your camera?
Sure, give me one moment.
Come on, Shay, you're a pro.
There we are.
Shay, if I'd known this is what it takes to get an appointment with you, I would have set this up a long time ago.
Wonderful lighting. Thank you.
Good, good, good. Thank you. Mr.
Final-
Reeves, how are you?
I am fine.
Good, good.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting in approximately 1 minute, waiting for one more panelist. Detective Vance Harper, are you present?
Something around here.
Yeah.
Detective Harper, can you give us a test, please?
Go in my car,
hear me
open my
okay?
phone, give me that writing pad.
Yes.
It's green, you know what I'm talking about.
Am I coming through okay, ma'am?
Yes, let's see, and your picture? Receipt, okay. That's fine. Perfect. Thank you. Our presentation will begin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Effects of Domestic Violence Forum. At this time, I would like to introduce to you our moderator and reporter from WPTV News Channel 5, Arthur Mondell.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. Very powerful stuff, both cinematically and also when looking at the real life data, because life is beyond a video or film. Good evening and welcome to the Effects of Domestic Violence Forum hosted by the Urban League of Palm Beach County and Destiny by Choice, Inc. This forum is part of the Community Police Relations Justice Initiative designed to create opportunities of educational exchanges in a concerted effort with industry professionals, community residents, adults, youth law enforcement officers, and other stakeholders regarding economic and domestic violence issues in the Black and minority communities through Palm Beach County and across the nation. But before we get started, please keep your PC, tablets, or iPhones on silent. In addition, we ask that you take the survey. You'll see the link right there in the chat, critiquing the presentation and the information you'll receive this evening. You'll also find the contact information for this evening's guest speaker and panelists located in the chat as well. This evening, we're delighted to have a dynamic guest speaker and an expert panel to discuss the effects of domestic violence. But before we invite our guests to speak, please help me welcome the president and CEO of the Urban League of Palm Beach County, Patrick Franklin.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this evening to discuss domestic violence. Arthur, thank you for agreeing to join us and help us guide us through this evening. I'm looking forward to my good friend, Dr. J.R. Thickland, who's an expert on domestic violence, bring about an understanding and educational awareness to all of us so that we can understand better how can we help avoid and prevent domestic violence in our families across this community. So with that being said, I want to thank all the Urban League staff, and on behalf of the board of directors of the Urban League, thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned for an additional events just like this coming up every month, okay? So give us your feedback, give us your comments, but I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on back to Arthur. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin, for your gracious welcome and scope of this evening's presentation. At this time, I would like to introduce you to Reverend Audrey L. Davis Jones, who will conduct the invocation.
Good evening. Most gracious Father, you created us in your image and you breathed life into us. Each and every one of us, you know how we should live. We ask you, Lord God, to please free those living with abuse and physically and mentally and spiritually from their oppressors. Father God, we just ask that you just continue to give us the energy and the strength to walk in peace and enjoy life, a full life in the abundance of your blessings. Father God, be with all of the men and the women that are here, Father God, and those that are out and who are in doubt of their relationships. Lord God, we ask that you continue to be with each and one of us. Let those who discern any abuse that may exist, Father God, please give them the discerning spirit. Help us to be strong stewards, Father God. And as we entrust you with our lives, gives us courage and strength. And we ask this in Jesus' name, we pray. Amen.
Already how much of an impact this had on you.
He's wonderful, Scott. I don't understand. How can people
I want to thank you, Pastor Davis Jones, and also I want to thank you for all the stories that you've been a part of. I've interviewed you, and I know you have great things planned for Battle Scar Ministries. She's working on opening up a nonprofit in which your purchases would actually benefit women and men as they escape bad situations. So I want to thank you for everything that you've done for Palm Beach County. Also, at the same time, communities are empowered when public safety institutions engage in public dialogue and commit to structural change, implementing truth and reconciliation commissions, and committing to a study of internal police relations, justice, and preliminary steps toward culture change in police departments and racial injustice across our nation. Community empowerment is also achieved by investing in economic and social equality locally and nationally. Tonight's forum will include, but are not limited to, critical conversations of the effects of domestic violence in the Black community as it relates to Black women in particular. We will hear alarming statistics, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office reports, information about protection, shelters, and programs. You will hear from a courageous survivor and her journey to combat domestic violence. But first, to illustrate the significant impact domestic violence has had on families prior to the pandemic, including the increased statistics, as we are all forced to stay home, please watch the next two news reports from WPBF 25 News about domestic violence cases that occur daily.
A young woman shot to death in her own home, and tonight police are searching for her boyfriend. Good evening. I'm Tiffany Kenny. Thank you for joining us. Ari Hyde has been at the scene of this shooting all day. He joins us now from Riviera Beach with the very latest. Ari?
It's about 7 hours now since the shooting. You can see police are still here. You can see this neighborhood is still taped off. Police believe they know who committed this murder. What they have to do now is just try to find him. Hours Hours after the murder, family members continued to arrive at the home, refusing to believe what they'd heard.
Everybody loved her. She was sweet. We used to just have fun and make dance videos and stuff.
It was just after 4 p.m. Police say 21-year-old Dominique Flood was with her boyfriend at her home here on West 36th Street in Riviera Beach when the boyfriend shot and killed her.
There's no indication yet of what exactly happened between them to cause it to come to this kind of end.
2 other people were in the house when Flood was killed. They were not hurt. The boyfriend ran. He is still on the loose. Police have not released his name.
I love my cousin, but I don't even know why he did this to her.
Along with family, local counselors arrived on scene looking to help any way they could.
It's just tear your heart apart. So devastating. You know, to see a mother cry for her baby.
It's a sense of unbelief, but it's a sense of hurt. Right now, they feel like they're in a dream. It's not even real. It's a surreal moment.
And it's a moment the family needs to try to absorb exactly what they've lost.
Everything, I don't know.
Again, police say there were 2 other people inside the house when this shooting happened. They believe they, perhaps other people in this neighborhood, saw something, heard something. They're hoping somebody will step forward and help them catch this killer. We're live tonight in Riviera Beach. Ari Height, WPBF 25 News.
We're learning more about the man who confessed to killing his ex-wife over the weekend. Her Lake Worth home was a major crime scene. Saturday morning, Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the home of Nancy Guarnieri to do a welfare check on her. She had not shown up for work for 2 days. Someone inside shut the front door. Minutes later, deputies are greeted by her ex-husband, Stephen Guarnieri. He told investigators that he killed his ex-wife and was cleaning up the crime scene. He also told deputies that he had been dealing with domestic issues with Nancy for 31 years and that he deserved an award for killing her. Deputies entered the home and found Nancy Guarnieri in the bedroom, wrapped in bed sheets. She had multiple stab wounds.
You don't think something like that could happen to somebody that you know.
Nicole Jackson is a hairstylist. She worked with Nancy for 3 years.
Nancy, she was like the life of the salon. She had a lot of stories to tell us that were funny. She had her own little quirkiness about herself, but she would give you the shirt off her back if she needed to.
Deputies arrested Guarnieri. He told detectives he killed Nancy after she served him with eviction papers and told him he needed to move out in 24 hours. They say he confessed to smothering her with a pillow while she was asleep and stabbing her multiple times. He remains at the Palm Beach County Jail.
Ex, estranged, all these words that we use basically mean that they're no longer together. And that was the understanding that we're no longer together, except turn it down. For one problem, the perpetrator don't tend to get the memo.
Reverend J.R. Thickland is a domestic violence expert in Palm Beach County.
There's no way to determine what's going to tick them off. Sometimes just thinking about what they've lost, their own regret, their anger, the fact that you're doing better.
At his first appearance hearing, the judge denied bond for Stephen Guarnieri. He's due back in court in October. In Lake Worth, Ted White, WPBF 25 News.
And ladies and gentlemen, those were only 2 cases of domestic violence that can happen to anyone at any age, that can occur both to heterosexual and same-sex relationships. Domestic violence can also include violence against children, parents, or the elderly, and can take on several forms, including physical, verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse. In the United States, an estimated 10 million people experience domestic violence every year. That's according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. About 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. Listen to that. 20 people per minute. About 1 in 4 women, 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, sexual violence, and or partner stalking with injury, PTSD, contraction of STDs. In fact, I did a story on this about last month. I think that number is actually higher. I think for men, I think it's going to be 1 in 4, and I think for women, it's 1 in 3. Okay, at this time, we want to hear from the experts who will help break down this domestic violence threat to our society. Our guest speaker for this evening is Reverend Dr. J.R. Thickland, CEO, Destiny by Choice. Doctor, the last time I spoke to you, I did a story on you. South Florida churches respond to domestic violence and denial. Got a lot of insight and input, and it's great to see you on the front lines, speaking with us journalists first to spread the word to this county. Dr. Thickland is the lead servant and influencer of Transforming Grace Ministries and president and CEO of Destiny by Choice, Inc., where he is empowering lives and shaping destinies of lives impacted by domestic violence and related abuse. He is considered a subject matter expert. Thickland carries an anointing and great burden for families and hurting people and those that are bound and afflicted, and has served in the ministry for over 38 years. Dr. Thickland Ministry transcends the four walls of church. Yes, he's a revivalist. He is indeed a marketplace influencer, community advocate, and transformer, being able to reach people in all sectors of society. He has worked with the Safe Return Domestic Violence Program with incarcerated men within reentry correctional facilities, transforming their lives, addressing purpose, manhood, and fatherhood. He's a certified cultural competency trainer, anger management specialist, and domestic violence specialist, mental health first aid facilitator for adults and youth, certified 24/7 dad trainer, and Dr. Dad and 7 Secrets of Effective Fathering with the National Fatherhood Initiative and National Center on Fathering, as well as P facilitator. Lastly, Dr. Thickland serves as the current president of the Palm Beach County Clergy Alliance and lead director of the African American Domestic Peace Project in West Palm Beach, Florida. Co-author of Speaking of Faith, Domestic Violence Programs in the African American Church, in which he collaborated with Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community out of the University of Minnesota. Dr. Thickland, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, sir.
Our communities are torn by violence. Our families are destroyed by violence. Our faith is tested by violence. It's incumbent upon each and every one of us to respond to the violence. Good evening, and thank you so very much. Thank you for the warm introduction, Art Mondell. You are one prolific journalist, and I really appreciate your dedication to your subject matter. To the Urban League of Palm Beach County, CEO, Mr. Patrick Franklin, to Salon Johnson and the entire staff of the Urban League, I want to thank you for your commitment to the betterment of our community, your commitment in making sure that we're informed, we're equipped, but we're also empowered. To all of those that are here, my colleagues that make up the panel, for all your incredible sacrifice, your experiences, and all that you give back to this community, I thank you as well. Today, we're challenged with the subject matter, the effects of domestic violence. Now, I want you to understand, when we talk about the effects, we're going to talk tonight about the effects. We could talk about the prevalence of domestic violence and how proportionate and disproportionate it affects communities. We could talk about, if we would, other intersections of domestic violence. But tonight, we want to really bring front and center the effects of what happened with domestic violence as part of our society. There's an Ashanti proverb that says, the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people. And so we understand that when we talk about domestic violence, we have to have clear understanding that domestic violence goes beyond just hitting and those things there. As a matter of fact, for the purpose of a real short understanding, domestic violence is basically, it's the willful intimidation. It's the willful intimidation, the physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and other abusive behavior that is meant to be a systematic system of power and control over victims. This goes beyond just physical abuse. We're talking about mental, verbal, sexual, emotional, economical, and we're talking about long-term effects that it has on our community. Earlier, you heard Mr. Mondell begin to cite some statistics, and he talked about the number of people that are actually involved in domestic violence, or 1 out of 4 women that will experience it in their lifetime. And even more currently, and depends on which statistic, 1 out of 7 men, or 1 out of 9. Either way it goes, it's one too many that has been affected by domestic violence. When we understand that in the state of Florida alone, in 2020, there was over 106,515 domestic violence incidents. And people, keep in mind,
These are only the reported cases. Domestic violence still ranks as the #1 unreported crime in America. 198 homicides, 19 manslaughter, 127 foul as aggravated stalking. I don't want to overdose you with statistics because I need you to understand that these statistics represent families. They represent lives. They represent individuals. They represent children. They represent members of our community. They represent neighbors, relatives. They even represent co-workers. When we look at in Palm Beach County, as we make it even more personal, over 4,359 domestic violence cases in 2020, 8 homicides, 2 manslaughters, 92 intimate partner violence rape offenses, 1,480 domestic violence case injunction for protection order, not to mention nearly 4,600 domestic violence cases investigated in child welfare, 376 verified cases of intimate partner violence. Why is this important? It's important because, folks, these are our neighbors. These are our fellow citizens, our fellow co-workers, those that we deal with every day. So the impact of domestic violence is really everyone's business because domestic violence never occurs in a vacuum. It always have a way of connecting outside of just the individuals that are involved. See, that empty school desk, the empty school desk for the kid who unfortunately was caught in the crossfire of domestic violence. The empty desk, perhaps on your job, where a coworker once worked. She's gone or he's gone because of domestic violence. As you see, once again, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men all experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Each year, once again, domestic violence is affecting nearly 10 million people in the United States. Think about that, 10 million people that are experiencing domestic violence. And I would dare say to you that when we look at it, you've got to understand it's not just physical violence. You're talking about emotional violence. You talk about all these things that impacts us. You talk about the fact that even in the state of Florida, that we see not only this domestic violence happening, but we oftentimes see how it affects everyone. Although domestic violence crosses every social, economic, and ethnic line, we have to be true to the fact that disproportionately domestic violence happens to people of color, particularly Black women and Black men. More than 40% of Black women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. This is according to the Institute of Women's Policy Research study about Black women in the United States. In comparison, 31.5% of all women will experience domestic violence. Why is this important, folks? It's important because of the fact we're talking about really a pandemic, an epidemic. The World Health Organization several years ago declared domestic violence as being an epidemic in our society. Why? Because in fact, domestic violence did more to destroy families and destroy the very center of our society than any particular crime. When we recognize the fact that in dealing with domestic violence, we're talking about families, we're talking about communities, we're talking about systems actually being interrupted. So is there a cost? Yes. When you consider that 53.8% of Black women had experienced psychological abuse, while 41.2% of Black women had experienced physical abuse. Why is that important? I want to particularly talk about the fact, the long-term effect of domestic violence. Psychologically, long after scars have healed, long after the bruises are gone away, we're dealing with the psychological abuse, trauma, those that are dealing with untreated trauma. We're talking about generational being passed down because of those that witness domestic violence. 1 in 15 children each year will witness domestic violence, being exposed to it. And sadly enough, we recognize that the abuser oftentimes is a product of their own home. In other words, what are we saying? We recognize that the abuser themselves once was a victim that witnessed domestic violence. So domestic violence is a learned behavior. And unfortunately, it has a cyclical effect that we can see it long-term being played out in the lives of many people. And how does it affect us? It affects us greatly, because when we look at the fact of domestic violence, we're talking about domestic violence impacts us in so many ways. I want to take a little bit more time to put some emphasis, particularly on Black women, because they're 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by men than white women. 2.5 more likely to be murdered. Majority of these cases, 92%, the person who killed them, they knew them. So nearly all of these killings are interracial, meaning that they were committed by a Black man against a Black woman. And we talk about Black Lives Matter. Let's start where it really begins. It does not start at the end of a barrel of an unjust arrest. It doesn't start at the end of being profiled. It really starts long before then. If Black lives to matter, it must matter with us first and foremost in valuing who we are to one another. We're better than that, but we must take the steps collectively and individually to make this a better world. So why is this important? When we look at this, 50% of these homicides were committed, once again, by a person that the victim knew, a person that was involved with. So as we look at domestic violence, we all have to look at the fact, why is it important when I talk about Black women? Because we cannot deny the fact, people, that yes, even racism plays its part inside of it. As a matter of fact, if you were to check with the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they will let you know that systemic racism does have its part in the disproportionate number that we see with Black women and Black men suffering at the hands of domestic violence. Unequal access to services, those things are there. You double down between racism, and then you look at sexism, and now Black women are twice the victim as their counterparts. So when we recognize that, that means that we have to understand that there's work to be done. The effects of domestic violence, it impacts every facet of society. As a matter of fact, it impacts even the workplace. Domestic violence happening. Did you not realize that over 8 million days, no, it's only 365 days in a year, but it's estimated that victims of domestic violence miss an average of 8 million days a year from work. Do you understand what that means? That means the domestic violence may have stopped, but the person cannot go to work because of injury, because of harm, because of being traumatized, because of not having services. Yeah, it's more than a lover's quarrel. It's more than a smack here and there. It is about control. It's about power. It's about manipulation. So domestic violence crosses every facet of our society. When we look at the fact that domestic violence, when domestic violence is committed with the presence of gun, we begin to see a higher rate of homicide. As a matter of fact, the presence of gun in domestic violence situation increased the risk of homicide by 500%. And so we talk about gun law, domestic violence impacted, that the gun or the weapon of choice in domestic violence is a gun. So when we consider this, we must understand we all have a responsibility. When we look at the fact, watch this, because we have in our panel, we're going to have Ms. Shay Spencer, the CEO of the YWCA, and she will be able to even testify to this part here. Now think about this for a second. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls that are made in place to domestic violence hotline nationwide. On a typical day. Not to mention that those numbers are increased around times like Super Bowl, around times of holidays, those numbers are increased. So we're talking about the hotlines are overflooded. We're talking about shelters, they're being filled oftentimes to capacity because of domestic violence. So we look at women between the ages of 18 to 24 years of age are most commonly abused by an intimate partner. Domestic violence victimization is correlated with higher numbers and rates of depression and suicidal behavior. See, domestic violence doesn't just impact the victim once, it impacts the victim over and over again. It impacts their ability to get work, to maintain work. It impacts their ability to even be employable. And so it leads us to economical abuse. When we see economical abuse happening, we see it happen because there's still the power and control, not allowing the individual to work, not allowing the individual to be able to better themselves. And what about the fact when they're in an abusive relationship and we're talking about what we call coerced spending, when the perpetrator is taking control of the relationship and perhaps run up credit cards, only running the credit. And now the victim finds themselves buried inside of their relationship of abuse. See, domestic violence is very important and it affects our society in many ways. And I want to just talk just a little bit about it because of the fact each of us have a role that we can play. Each of us. As I said earlier, victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year. The costs of intimate partner violence have exceeded over $10 billion a year. I want you to hear that. The costs of intimate partner violence have exceeded over $10 billion a year. You think about it. The president just signed into law a infrastructure package about $1.3 trillion. And before then, when we looked at stimulus, we was trying to sign into law stimulus package. And we can see right here that domestic violence alone puts a big dent inside of anything that's happening. And none of that was in the infrastructure package. That was about roads and bridges and highways. But why is this important? It's important, people, because of the fact it affects us. And regardless of the shame that many people feel that are experiencing domestic violence, listen, it is time that we turn the table on domestic violence. Let's take the shame from the victim and put the responsibility and the shame on the perpetrator. And then in addition to that, let's provide sources and resources to be able to bring healing and strength to the family. Allow me just a few more moments because I want to talk about this and then we'll go to our panel. Consider that domestic violence, oftentimes the face of it is a black eye, it's bruises, it's broken bones. But you've got to understand, long before a victim is ever beaten up, they're being down by words, by manipulation, by threats and intimidation. We understand that women oftentimes by their intimate partners are more vulnerable to contracting HIV or other sexually transmitted diseases or infection due to forced intercourse or prolonged exposure to stress. In other words, we see domestic violence play itself out across the spectrum, what we call reproduction coercion, when the victim is forced to engage in unprotected sex, manipulated about birth control, deliberately trying to get them pregnant. All of those things there go beyond what we generally see with our eyes as far as the pictures of what domestic violence look like. Let's look at the fact of the severe depression, the anxiety, the many different things that happen as a result. Women that experience domestic violence and victims that experience domestic violence increase in their attempts of suicide ideations. See, domestic violence doesn't just stop at being hit. It is something that affects the entire family. We all have responsibility. So I want to just go and get ready to conclude by simply sharing this with you. When we look at domestic violence, oftentimes it's accompanied even inside of sexual assault that is oftentimes accompanied by domestic violence. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 40 men in the United States are victims of rape or attempted rape during their lifetime. Nearly 1 in 5 women and 1 in 12 men have experienced contact sexual violence by their intimate partner. When we look at stalking and all of these things that happen, how does it affect the community? I'm glad you asked. When you consider the fact, the high price of healthcare due to domestic violence, when we look at the fact of the increased number of victims of domestic violence showing up in the emergency room, in some cases, 36% of the emergency room visits by victims are by victims of domestic violence. When we consider the fact that domestic violence is the cause of over 25 to 28% of fetal abnormalities, that domestic violence have contributed to not only maternal mortality, meaning women who have died while pregnant and died even in childbirth, but also infant mortality. See, domestic violence is not this thing that stays in this little restricted area. It affects every aspect of our society. When we consider the connection between domestic violence and mental health, and the impact that it has, long-term trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the many things that go along with it, it is a call to us that we must work together cohesively in order to address domestic violence. Did I even mention the fact that 15% of the violent crime calls for most police are always domestic violence? It is their most plenteous call. It's abundantly the calls that they get more so than anything. And let me take a moment to say this. It costs the cities and municipalities, it costs them resources and money. Did you not know that one of the most dangerous calls that law enforcement go on is domestic violence? That more police officers are killed or injured in responding to domestic violence calls than they are with any other type of crime that they go to? because domestic violence is tricky. That means that oftentimes in one moment, the police officer is expected to be able to come, answer the call, decipher who's the perpetrator, who's the primary aggressor, who's the victim. In one swoop, trying to bring peace and order, oftentimes be prohibited from doing what they should do, even by the victim. Domestic violence is not black and white. Domestic violence is not this or that. I say to you that domestic violence is this, that, and some more. So we all have a responsibility inside of it. So when we look at the fact that 1 in 2 female murder victims and 1 in 13 male murder victims are killed by intimate partner violence. Earlier, you saw the domestic violence clips of some things that are locally. As I travel the country, I use different things to talk about this subject matter. But what we do know is that we all have something that we can do, that we cannot afford to stand by idly and not do anything about domestic violence. The economic and financial impact of domestic violence really leaves victims at a very, very vulnerable place. What do you mean? I talked about preventing them from going to work, but also sabotaging a victim's employment, interfering with the victim's work performance. Folks, we're talking about things like harassing them, such as frequent calling activities, distracting them on the job, causing many of them to get fired from the job, demanding that the victim quit their job. This is domestic violence, people. Preventing the victim from looking for jobs or for attending job interviews because it is about power and control. And so when we look at this, folks, we have to consider the fact, what is it that we can do? We can educate ourselves, we can become empowered, but most of all, we can begin to work cohesively to reduce domestic violence. Domestic violence must be addressed from a systematic, coordinated community effort. Palm Beach County is moving toward that right now in advising community coordinated effort in addressing domestic violence. Ask yourself the question, are you involved in that process? Because you need to be involved. From the church house to your house, from the White House to the Lighthouse, domestic violence must be addressed, and it requires your attention. So I say to you today, the defects of domestic violence run far and near. Children that witness domestic violence oftentimes find themselves with difficulties even functioning in schools. Once again, domestic violence is a learned behavior. Dorothy Law notes that children learn what they live and they live what they learn. When a child lives with hostility, they learn to condemn. When a child lives in an atmosphere such as domestic violence, they tend to carry that on. The direct correlation between domestic violence and bullying is being noted every day. And we're seeing the cyclical effect of domestic violence. So I close today inside of our time, not only challenging you, but also inviting you to be a part of the change. Be part of the change by being able to open up your mouths and be able to speak out. Because if we're going to address domestic violence, it must happen from every aspect of our society. Not just the police officer, the church house. I challenge communities of faith. People will never change that which we're unwilling to confront. We'll never confront that which we're unwilling to identify. We'll never identify that which we're unwilling to acknowledge. And we will never acknowledge that which we're unwilling to accept. So my challenge to you today is to make up your mind today, in what way can I get involved? We're here, our contact information is there, and so is the panel. We can use your help because many hands makes a load lighter. I thank you for your part in addressing domestic violence. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Thickland, what a powerful speech. I want to thank you very much. Put in your toolkit info in that chat box if you don't mind. Dr. Thickland, I met him when I was doing a news story, and we actually met in the church. Because again, you say this is not in a vacuum. It is happening in American pulpits. Very important stuff. Also, this word resilience. Before I move on, I want to go into that. So you watching who say, well, I'm strong, I'm resilient. Dr. Thickland, that is not one of his favorite words. There's good and bad to being resilient. Can you mention that real quick, sir?
Exactly. So normally when we think about the word resilient, we talk about the ability to withstand, to be adaptable inside of things. But sometimes the resilience can work against you inside of being a victim of domestic violence, meaning oftentimes I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just going to keep this to myself. I can go through this by myself. And let me say something to you. There's a difference between isolation and solitude. They both involve being by yourself, but it's the condition of the mind that determines the difference inside of it. When you're in isolation, one of the favorite tactics of an abuser is to isolate the victim. For what reason? From support, from resources, from anything that can help them. On the other hand, solitude is that place of peace, that place of where I can be poured into, receive information, access resources, and be able to walk through that journey with someone alongside me.
Absolutely. And then the other word, something that you mentioned, I didn't include it in my story, but I think this is the right time to talk about it in our community. Post-traumatic slave disorder. What exactly is that, and why did you use that in the pulpit?
Okay, I use the word post-traumatic slave disorder. Many people know the book by, I believe, Dr. George Ellis, who talks about post-traumatic slave disorder, which basically is saying the fact that we are still dealing with the ramifications of slavery. In other words, the trauma from slavery that was untreated, unresolved, unattended to, we're still dealing with it. And what that comes to is oftentimes a minimization of who we are. And yet it's still the thirst for power to triumph anything that threatens who we think we are. So in other words, what happens is the fact that we end up being self-destructive inside of our way that we operate. You know, one of the things that I often say that the whole thing about domestic violence is about power and control. Our society, even its democracy, is really established upon power. We have our seats of government. But what must happen if we're going to see a real change in our society is that it's from the words of Jimi Hendrix, who said, until the power of love is stronger than the love for power, only then will the world know peace. And so we have to find that peace by having if you will, a proclivity toward love than we do toward power.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Thickland. We'll hear more from you a little bit later. Also, please look at the link in the chat box to complete a survey about this here presentation that we're doing right now. All right, let's hear from our panel of experts on domestic violence. Joining us this evening is Shay Spencer, CEO, YWCA, and Sabrina Harris, CEO, House of Illionaires, Inc., and Detective Vance Harper, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. I first want to introduce to you Ms. Shay Spencer. Shay F. Spencer currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Palm Beach County. Ms. Spencer has over 15 years of nonprofit experience, including fundraising and community engagement. For many years, Shay has served her local community and worked to drive support for programs and services surrounding homelessness, food insecurity, education, health, job readiness, entrepreneurship, disadvantaged youth, and low-income initiatives. Recently, as CEO of the Homeless Coalition, Shay was responsible for managing day-to-day operations, leading fundraising efforts, actively engaged in the community, and serving as the face of the organization. Throughout her career, she managed fundraising campaigns for United Way and served as the Assistant Vice President of Hope, South Florida, or HSF. Shay is an all-around leader in her community and was recently nominated by Legacy Magazine as one of South Florida's most influential and prominent women in business and industry. She serves on Nova Southeastern University's nonprofit advisory board and is an active member of the Links Incorporated, a service organization comprised of more than 16,000 African-American women across the nation devoted to strengthening local communities through education, advocacy, volunteering, and fundraising. Shay, the time has come to hear from you.
Thank you for that, Arthur Mondell. Thank you. Thank you, Arthur Mondell, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Patrick Franklin, Reverend Thickland, Sulan Johnson, and all of the organizers of tonight's event, as well as the participants and attendees. It is actually wonderful to be here with each of you this evening. I am Shay Spencer, CEO of YWCA of Palm Beach County, and I won't speak too long about myself because I'd much rather speak about YWCA and our programs and services and the impact that we're having in the community. But I do have over 16 years of nonprofit experience serving in many different facets throughout the Tri-County area, working with homeless initiatives, as well as serving veterans, working with youth and educational, as well as early education programs. I came to YWCA last summer during the height of the pandemic, and I had the ability to come on board as the new CEO. And I want to share information with all of you about who we are, what we do, and how we're impacting the Palm Beach County community. The very first YWCA was actually formulated in 1858. That was about 162 years ago, and it was based upon the premise that there's an intersectionality that exists between people of color and women. So the same challenges and some of the same detriments that people of color face, women also face. And so this massive mission, which is technically two separate components, were mashed together as one, and they have been intertwined and worked so beautifully together. In Palm Beach County, YWCA is actually 105 years old. We have 200 local associations across the United States. So that includes California, New York, Hawaii, Georgia, and the Carolinas. We have representation in 120 countries, including Africa, Canada, Mexico, India, and Jamaica. Actually, my first week on the job, I received an email from the YWCA in Africa, and I thought it was a hoax. I'm thinking, I'm getting an email from Africa. You know, what a coincidence. But they unfortunately had a young lady here in the Florida community who was originally from Africa, who was experiencing domestic violence and homeless at the time and needed assistance. So it is, I have to say, it warms my heart, and I'm proud to do this work. And again, thank you all so much for organizing this event and giving us this opportunity. For more than 100 years, YWCA has really worked to advocate for the civil rights of marginalized communities. We do that by working in the community to identify the challenges that they face, and then implementing programs and services to help those communities overcome their challenges. So we're working towards giving them the tools and the resources they need to become self-sufficient and independent, which is what every woman, child, and family really needs. Our programs actually focus on several key areas, including affordable housing, affordable childcare, if there's any such thing anymore, early education programs, gender equity, racial and social justice programs as well. In Palm Beach County, we have built a reputation for ourselves for the good work that we do servicing domestic abuse survivors and their children. It is the largest program that we have within the organization. The shelter was actually started more than 40 years ago. I know this program tonight is really about education and raising awareness and sharing information about domestic violence. But once I talk to you about that, I want to spend just a couple seconds talking to you all about some of the other programs and services that we offer. We actually have the oldest and largest domestic violence shelter in Palm Beach County. We have the ability to serve up to 72 women and children at a time. Our shelter has an average stay of about 6 to 8 weeks. So a woman and child can come to our shelter and live there for 6 to 8 weeks while they're escaping domestic abuse. During their time at our shelter, we provide food, clothes, housing, transportation, legal assistance should they need to go to court and either fight for custody of their children or obtain a restraining order or request alimony for support. We also provide financial assistance. Many of the women who come to us are in financial need. They may have emergency needs that they can't meet. They may have medical medications and prescription drugs that they are not able to pay for. We even see some of our participants come to us with $300 in car repairs that they cannot afford. And so we're there to provide that level of support to them. So instead of having them park that automobile and lose their independence in transportation for 9 months, we're able to provide that additional support as well. Some of the additional supports that we also provide, and Reverend Thickland touched on some of these. He talked about financial abuse, which is very, very real and prominent in domestic abuse situations. We have an amazing program called the Economic Justice Program, or Women Improving Their Tomorrow. It is a program that we have with several different organizations and corporations across Palm Beach County, but our main supporter and partner is Bank of America, and we provide financial literacy services to those who are in need. We help them rebuild their credit. We talk to them about opening a bank account, budgeting, all sorts of things. We even assist them with obtaining their GED if they need to do that. And we also have services to help them with English and language classes if necessary. Sometimes we find that participants do not reach out to help because there's a language barrier there. We also have a primary prevention program, which I think is absolutely fantastic. We talk about breaking the cycle of violence. The primary prevention program actually allows us to work with high school, middle school, and grade 8 school children. It's a 10-week program that really teaches them about the effects of domestic violence, the red flags, how to break the cycle of violence, and really working towards ensuring that our children are educated. One main component of the program is also the coaching boys to men. It's a new component to the program that allows us to work with athletes and use those athletes as advocates against domestic violence. We also have a child protective investigative program, which allows us to have a legal advocate that goes to court with the mom and fight for her child to stay with her while she sorts out her domestic violence situation. Many times the abuser will use the child to further punish the woman. So even though he's not necessarily interested in raising the child, he wants to fight for custody as punitive damages to the woman. So we work towards helping her in that respect. We also have the rapid rehousing program, which is a major part of what we do. It allows us to provide permanent housing for women and children who are in need. We provide first, last, and security deposits, as well as any other assistance that they might need. So help with obtaining furniture, and even help with getting internet services for their home through a partnership that we have with Comcast. Finally, the last part of the domestic violence program is what we call our Women's Health Institute program, or the Y Health program. It allows us to provide increased access to healthcare for women and children who are in need. It's a partnership that we have with Florida Atlantic University, and these women can come to us and get vision screenings, hearing screenings, vaccinations, and immunizations. They can get treatment for physical illnesses or ailments or bruises that they might have. One of the amazing things about this program is that they can use this program on a continuous basis. So they are not subjected to the 6 to 8 weeks that they're in the shelter. In 2 years, if they wanted to come back and use this program, they're welcome to do that. And then very quickly, we have a childcare program that provides free childcare for children ages 3 to 5 years old from low to moderate income families. The goal is to give them the tools and resources they need to be successful once they enter the public school system. And I've already talked to you guys a little bit about the Women's Health Institute. Finally, we have a racial justice program, which I'm very, very proud of, and we're looking to grow that program. It allows us to build partnerships and collaborations in Palm Beach County that reinforce the philosophy that this is a place where we all should feel safe and welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some information about YWCA. And again, I know that tonight's discussion is really about domestic violence, but YWCA does so much more than that.
Thank you, Shay. Thorough. I think everyone's looking forward to hearing more from you with all of their questions. Thank you very much for that. And so our second panelist is Ms. Sabrina Harris, CEO of House of Love Illionaires, Inc. This is probably one of the most hardest working people in Palm Beach County when it comes to being in front of a camera. You know a lot of the people that I run with working in media. Sabrina Harris' professional career spans 3 decades to include public service, business administration and management, quality assurance management, frontline supervision, medical services, professional training and development, professionship, entrepreneurship, public safety, mental health counseling, crisis intervention and support, trauma-informed education and care, holistic wellness approaches, child welfare, and victim advocacy, among so many other things. Sabrina is a 2-time graduate of Palm Beach Atlantic University, obtaining a master's degree in counseling, psychology, with a tri-certification in mental health, addictions, and marriage and family therapy, in addition to a master's degree in leadership in 2015. And then she got the doctorate in counseling, psychology, and supervision in spring 2020. Sabrina is also the Chief Executive Officer, Executive Director, and Business Strategist of the House of Illionaires, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit organization utilizing psychoeducation, activism, advocacy, and community engagement to primarily educate and motivate mature women, teens, and adolescent girls to positively gain and maintain control of their lives. Her favorite word is transformational, a single word that best describes her as a person, professional, a leader, a counselor, and spiritual advisor, and also a very impactful and influential media representative. Okay, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, take it away.
I want to I'm humbled. I want to, first of all, give honor to God for everything that I am able to do in this life and on this earth. To the Urban League of Palm Beach County, to all of the affiliates and associates, thank you so much for allowing me to grace the panel. To my mentor and beloved friend, Dr. Pastor J.R. Thickland, thank you so much for always opening the door and reaching back and pulling me forward. I want to take a moment to salute the Purple Angels, as we affectionately call them, those individuals who are no longer with us. And I also extend honor to strong survivors who are here and doing what they can to make a difference in lives daily. I want to thank God for my experience as a survivor of domestic violence and abuse, and in addition to a very detrimental and debilitating date rape. I bring a lot of experience in trauma and hardship and in difficulties, and being able to understand that there is beauty on the other side if we can get to the other side, and that our experience is worthy. The House of Love Illionaires, and Mr. Bondell, you did it famously, was birthed by the understanding of me mentoring to some young girls. And I shared that there was a billionaire at that particular time that they were searching for in the community. He had been gone for a series of days, and there was a lot of buzz about it, a lot of media. And amazingly enough, this man had amassed in life everything that you would consider that you wanted, that represented the American dream. He had the homes, the cars, the businesses, and all of that. But ultimately, they found this billionaire on the train, and he had positioned himself, and he was killed. And it resonated with me that tangible things are affinity of sorts. They feel good. They allow us to intrinsically feel connected. However, it is the intangibles of this life that really drive, motivate, and fuel. It's the love, the peace, the hope, the joy, all of these amazing things that money simply cannot. And it was a powerful message to those young ladies, and out of it was birthed the House of Love Illionaires. So I want you to take the billion out and the trillion out for a moment, and I want you to put love in and everything else that makes us feel good. I thank God for the opportunity to have worked with some amazing agencies, and I still do. ChildNet, Children's Home Society, Destiny by Choice, the In Violence Against Women organization, Palm Beach County Victim Services, their START team. I've just been welcome in so many different disciplines, but the understanding I want to leave in this moment is this analogy. Core root. I want you to remember. Because everything about domestic violence and abuse, in a sense, people look at on the surface. And I'll never forget the movie by Harrison Ford, What Lies Beneath. It was all about him being successful, but an illusion of everything that was going on in his life and his marriage and everything else that was well orchestrated. But imagine, and you never have before, experiencing a migraine headache. And you experience that headache repetitiously over a course of several weeks. Now, most would go to some type of over-the-counter prescription medication or something that would remedy that headache. So this day you have the headache, you take whatever you decides to resolve it, headache goes away. The next day, the headache returns. What is missing here is not the ability to pacify or reduce symptoms. It is getting to the core of the reason that they're happening. Because my message to you would have been, or would be, that it would be important for you to now go for a medical workup or do whatever is needed to figure out, why am I experiencing these headaches, instead of dulling them and reducing the symptomatic nature. So that is my message today. And that is where I see us headed in Palm Beach County. And I'm so excited about it. So once we get to the core root of a situation and figure out what is wrong, we can start working back to rectify it and make it. As far as the House of Love Illionaires is concerned, it was birthed out of my experience of surviving a domestically violent and abusive relationship into marriage. And I'm so happy to see young people on this chat. I'm watching the high school check-ins and all of that, because it was a mindset of me loving me that led to what I went through, and I was so young inside of it. But I also want you to catch this, that I would come to find, inside of being told that I was adopted, that I was abandoned in the hospital. So I never understood or made the connection as to why relationships were so important to me. So it was not that the relationship was necessarily healthy or productive or positive or all of these different things. You know, we meet and we have some good interaction, but I just wanted to be relational. So we cannot deny what is genetically evident. We cannot deny what is life-oriented. We cannot deny what is situationally a part of our environment when it comes to violence and abuse, and particularly domestic violence. So we have to right the wrongs. We have to fill in the gaps. We have to change the trajectory of what our understanding is about being relational. And that will require us to be accountable and a responsibility in a way that I'm not sure many people understand. Because you see, if I start with me and I attend to those things that are dysfunctional, that are challenging, that are uncertain, I'm not aware and I don't know and I fill in the blanks. If everyone does that, I promise you simultaneously, things will change in today's society. It's not enough to know. I love the term because it's beautiful. Knowledge is power. It's applied. Because once you know, it is your ownership to do better. And if we all do better by ourselves, then we can do better.
You panelists, such powerful words. You got to be writing this down. If you're in the audience and you're not writing, there's a problem. There's a lot that we need to ask these panelists to get to the root of why this is happening and why more people aren't speaking up. And thank you for explaining Lavillionaires. Thank you very much. I got it right this time. Thank you, Ms. Harris, for sharing your story and educating us on how to move on after enduring a domestic violence attack. We salute you for overcoming your ordeal. Please give Sabrina a round of applause, everyone. Okay, our final panelist for this evening is Detective Vance Harper, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
How you doing? Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I've been at the Sheriff's Office, January will be 15 years. I've been in the Domestic Violence Unit since 2016. I've been listening to everyone. Very, very good information that everybody's put out. Kind of on the front lines with dealing with domestic violence. I get a lot of stuff from the state, also our advocates. It's a very serious crime that happens all the time. It's unchecked. And a lot of times, as most panelists were saying, that some people overlook it, but it's really a problem that, again, even as the doctor said, the learned behavior. And I've been very fortunate to be able to teach all of the new hires at the sheriff's office, our domestic violence response team that we have. And I teach, when I do teach the class, I teach all of the men and women that come into law enforcement that domestic violence is a crisis and that it is a learned behavior, because when you can grasp that it's a learned behavior, you know, you go to a house and some people say, oh, I've been here 100 times. And that person's mind, most people don't realize that that's their learned behavior. And they think that they're in a real love situation, but it's actually not. There's different facets of love. I'm not gonna get into that, but I teach them to know that that woman or that even that man, that's their learned behavior. So someone being abused and then going back into it, and they don't understand that that is not genuine, authentic, agape love, the way we're supposed to love, unconditional love. So they tend to go back into it. And I always teach the officers coming in that you are the first line of defense, and they're looking for help. And it's how we address them helps them understand that we're there for them and not against them. And I think too, that's another thing we have to bridge as law enforcement, bridge the gap. When we go to a house, even when they're 100 times, it doesn't matter. You still treat that person. I tell them, treat it as just your mother, your sister, your brother, your father. So therefore, I just taught a class maybe 3 weeks ago, and we got different people from other agencies come in, and one was like, well, you know, it was more like you can kind of tell that the situation kind of had worn on them from previous encounters. And I just brought it to him. I said, well, if that was your mother, how would you feel? And it kind of changed the dynamics of his thought process. So I always tell people, treat it as if and that's your sister, your brother, somebody in your family. But understand that if you don't reach out the proper way, it can change the trajectory of that family's life for good and for bad. And so what I purpose to do when I encounter victims, even suspects, I interview them as well, that that behavior they have is a learned behavior, and you can't point the finger at any person per se, but if we don't step in as a community, as everybody was saying, to change the mindset of people when we encounter them and the impression that we leave on them, they won't understand it. So I always teach and tell the ladies and gentlemen at the sheriff's office that come in, anybody that comes in have to go through our domestic, the DART, call it the DART, domestic assault response team. You know, take pictures and do supplements for other officers on the scene of a domestic violence incident, that you treat it as a crisis, because it is. And I often tell people, I do a scenario with them, and I say, how many people have fired a firearm at the young age? And some people 6 and 8 years old. And now I didn't fire a gun at that time, but I bring it home to them. So that's his or her learned behavior. Their parents taught them, and they teach their children. So it kind of brings and bridges together for them, like, wait a minute. So they think that's normal? Yes. And I think what we have to realize in society, even if you go in someone's home, that's not kept, unfortunately, sometimes it's just their learned behavior. So when we grasp that in life as a whole, realize this person has a problem, because your thoughts are your reality. So that woman or that man that's a victim of domestic violence, that's their reality. The thoughts about the situation, or he provides for me, but because that's what they know and that's what they've learned over time. So it's very important for us as a community, not just law enforcement perspective, but all of us in our neighborhoods, even in the grocery store, everywhere we go, that we got to remember that there are people that are hurting quietly, and as was said earlier. So I just purpose to do, at my job, I purpose to let the victim know how much I care. It's not about putting someone in jail. At the end of the day, I want that victim to know that I care about her life or his life. That's the purpose. All the other stuff we can hash out, but I want them to be okay even after I leave the house. So we have our victim advocates that deal on that side. But my thing is, I want them to know this is bigger than me taking whoever to jail. I'm here because we want to change this avenue that you're on, and the way to do that. And even now, I still get victims that reach out to me, and I told them it's open line, because I want to be there for them, to let them know it's just not a job for me. I have purpose. And my purpose is to hopefully help them get out of the situation they're in that was learned from, mom, dad, whoever they were raised by. And I love what the doctor said earlier, is learned behavior. And when I put that together, I said, oh my God, when I got that as learned behavior, I'm done. I don't care what happens on the side of the judicial side of the side of the house, because I'm going to do my job every time I go there, because I know that this person's in a crisis. So I tell anybody that I teach, I said, treat domestic, please. Was verbal arguments or was it a physical? It is a crisis because it is. And the reason why it gets worse is because we're not treating it as a crisis. So like I said, I enjoy working with YWCA and all those that are involved because I know it takes a team. It's not an I, it's a team effort for all of us to come along together and do this together, even with tensions. And I deal with, doesn't matter what color. And like the doctor said earlier, I tell people in the class, domestic doesn't have race, face, or color. Don't care how much money you got. It's not about that. Again, power and control, but that learned behavior. So my thing is, when I'm out there, even everywhere I go, people see that I'm sure, oh, what do you do? Domestic violence. And people kind of get a little run away from it. But I love to talk to them because I let them know, no, this is serious. Some people say, how can you keep doing it? Well, because there's a purpose and there are a lot of people that are hurting and they need to know how much we care, not how much we know. And so that's what I purpose to do. And again, I appreciate you guys inviting me to this panel. Like I said, I really enjoy helping people because sometimes people don't know they need help. And I've had them turn on me likewise, but that doesn't stop me because what they do doesn't stop me. I continue to, and I still treat them the same way, even if they turn the other way when I'm trying to assist them, because at the end of the day, they don't know they need help. So I just, anyone listening, treat it as a crisis because it is.
Thank you, Detective. Powerful stuff, powerful stats. At the same time, we want to take questions from the audience. I do want to get questions lined up from our audience. Detective, you said this is a learned behavior. And so I have this question for you.
Yes,
I
sir.
understand that domestic violence, sir, is between an intimate partnership, but you did say it's a learned behavior. So now I want to talk about the children. Okay, so when I go to the World Health Organization and they talk about the individual level, these are the risk factors for children being wrapped up in this way of life. Lower levels of education, low income, being identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Working here in Palm Beach County or South Florida, based on your level of experience and years you've been in law enforcement, you said it runs across the gamut. But when we're talking about domestic violence in the cases that you're actually going to, I mean, who's most at risk?
Everybody actually involved, the children definitely, and I teach that as well with the kids. And unfortunately, I had the opportunity to do a class years ago in Lake Worth, and one of the psychiatrists, therapists that was there, she was explaining when I mentioned learned behavior, and she said, "Yes, you're right." And she said, she wanted to say something. She said, "I had a 7-year-old boy tell her that when I grow up, I hope my wife listens to me so I don't have to beat her." And so that tell automatically that in his mind, he see mom and dad, that they say they love each other, and then they get in a fight and mom stays there. So he thinks, well, wait a minute, that's love. So it affects everybody, even as was said earlier, it's the children, because think about it. These adults, we all were once children that's on this line now. So it starts even at that age. And that's why we're required to call law enforcement, required to notify DCF anytime there's a domestic situation, even if they're not present, because that child definitely suffers. And what we want to do is we want to break that cycle by getting that child help to the point where when we get them some counseling and also get the mom or the dad counseling, but it's involved heavily around everybody in that household, even that's linked to that household, the neighbors, the community itself is affected because every home has a community. So, and therefore in everybody, but the children are definitely have issues because they see this and they act out in school, and our teachers, and it spills into every avenue of our lives, even the places of business where young teenagers may work. So it starts, everybody is affected. So if no one comes in or steps in to say, hey, wait a minute, let's get this child some counseling, you're going to have issues. So that's why it's very important that we treat it as a crisis, even with the children. So everyone's affected, even like I said, even the suspect. And again, that's a learned behavior. He didn't come out of the mother's room and he didn't slap the doctor. I think it went the other way around. So when people realize that, it affects everybody, even the perpetrator. It's a learned behavior, unfortunately. And anything learned can be unlearned, but it's like an act of Congress trying to do that because of our minds.
Wow.
I hope that answers the question.
That does. And also, I want to go to Sabrina. You mentioned genetics. Where does genetics play a part in this? And if that's the case, that means it's going to happen earlier than people actually realize.
Absolutely. I want to say that definitely violence and abuse by standard, certainly learned behavior extracted from the environment, but there also is a situational aspect to it. I have been blessed to have the opportunity to assist victims into survivorship who did not witness this. They were not exposed to it. They felt like the parameters of the lives, even of the perpetrator, did not dictate that. But what was evident was mental illness, addiction, a lot of different things that led to a substandard way of living. As it relates to genetics, our DNA is coded. So a lot of your severe mental illness, your schizophrenia, your bipolar, these dynamics of mental illness, they're derived from your genetic code and they're evident at birth. What is not readily recognized or what is done as a misstep is either we minimize the behavior or we label. There's a lot of labeling of children who are dealing with mental illness, and they're bad, they're disruptive, all of these different things, and it's not getting to, again, the core root of the problem. It is not leading to a diagnosis. It's not leading to intervention. It is not leading to the proper level of care. I just had to share with the mother recently, I'm doing supervised intervention for DCF. However, her child is autistic with a number of other things. She didn't realize the dynamics of autism or being on the spectrum. So she did not understand how to correctly interact and relate with her child. So she had labeled her child as bad, and then her dynamic in her mind was to discipline, abuse, all of these different things that came to bear instead of understanding. So it's psychoeducation, the proper intervention and all of that. Not only is her child doing well, but she's doing famous now at parenting her child. So DNA cannot be disregarded as a situation evidence.
Psychoeducation, but that also means we got to get inside the church. You know, Dr. Thickland, I was very happy when he invited me, you know, to document what he's doing at area churches. But everyone, Sabrina, is not welcome in that. They're just not. If you have a problem, leave it to God. What do you want to say about getting to the root of science versus religion in certain communities who put an emphasis on faith?
I want to say that these dichotomies coexist. So mental health and spirituality go hand in hand. I love Pastor for the way he presented it, and I say it all the time, that we are a triune being, which we come mind, body, and spirit. So I would think, Mr. Mondale, that you wouldn't just deal with your mental or your psychological and leave your physical unattended or your spirituality unattended. To be honest, in the Black and brown community, spirituality is the core root. I was blessed to conduct research with 20 women, and I wanted to put a spin on things. I'm pretty good at doing that. But I wanted to emphasize the individuals who had never reported their crime, who had never sought intervention. Some of these women, we swung the pendulum from age 18 up to 65. And what did you know? The emphasis on them being able, from their perspective, and you have to be very clear about that when dealing with victimization, was that spirituality was the core root of it all. The prayer, the gospel, all of these inspirational things. So it is a intense look at the church, understanding that by spiritual standards, churches built as a hospital. And I've had to say that to many spiritual leaders, that you're going to have individuals who view spirituality to such a high degree, they're going to come to you for service. And I've said, if it's not you, I'm sure in every congregation, there is some level of mental health professionalism represented. So why not set up a shop of say? Why not have a standard or a model in the church and utilize your congregation to help your congregation or incoming? So there's no way to separate it. Mind, body, and spirit. If we're to be whole, if we're to be sustained, if we are to be viable and conflict-free, violence-free, it requires us to take responsibility for all this.
Powerful
Absolutely.
stuff. Thank you very. We got some students on here. Students, would you like to share your questions?
Yes, I was wondering, how has COVID-19 increased the number of domestic violence incidents?
Well,
You want me to answer that one, sir?
yeah, you go right ahead.
Yeah,
I'll jump in.
yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Doctor. You go ahead. You go first.
No, go ahead. I'll go right after you because you're directly there. You saw the impact of it.
I was actually working, of course, never stopped doing the initial 2020. The numbers definitely increased because they went on a lockdown. So therefore, the number of arrests went up, number of calls for service went up as far as officers to the house. Also to what I do with the state, I was getting more calls from the state in reference to violations of the order of no contact after the arrest was made. And also to going back to the house. And also too, we had a big problem. We still kind of have that problem now with they were reducing bond due to COVID. So now you stayed in overnight, but normally you would be in there, but yet you got out faster than you normally would because of COVID. So now you got the perpetrator going back, nowhere to go for the most part. If there's an order of no contact, to go to the house. So it caused a greater problem. And of course, because of, the essential things were open with I didn't understand this to each his own, but the liquor stores were considered priority. So that didn't help us none because you got people that are stuck in the house and most of the people that, for the most part, that we arrest, alcohol or drugs play a role, but alcohol has a little more weight on that. So you got that coupled with, now you locked in, you can't go anywhere, but you can go to the liquor store and buy liquor and then come home. And to be truthful with you, a lot of people found out even in their relationship. And I say this to people all the time, when you remove sexual relations from a relationship or money, if you don't have anything. And a lot of people found that out during the pandemic. That's all they had. And unfortunately, it caused even more domestic violence issues. Instead of the guy being able to leave or going an 8 or 9 hour job, a 10-hour job, vice versa, realize, wait a minute, what do I really have here? But we saw a great increase because of it. And we still kind of see it now, but it's definitely the dynamics shifted, thank God. But 2020 was, yes, you would think that there was nothing going on. No, it was something going on. And it was unfortunate because of the fact everybody was enclosed and a reality set in. What do I really have here?
Well, thank you, Detective. And then listen to this. Shay, I want you to answer this question. Who should someone confide in about abuse if that person does not want to tell trusted adults or the police?
Right. So one of the things that Dr. Thickland, I believe, mentioned at the beginning of this presentation is abusers tend to isolate survivors because they don't want them to have that support. So if you do not have an adult in your life that you feel like you can speak with, the suggestion is to go to your close friend, go to a family member. Many women and many survivors do not call the police. You heard Dr. Thickland talk about the fact that there's many cases of domestic abuse go unreported. And so when a survivor has the right support system, that is the first step to helping her outside of the cycle of abuse that she's experiencing. So there really is no right or wrong answer. The best answer is to have a strong support system. And that could be anyone. It could be a coworker, it could be a family member, it could be a neighbor, it could be a friend. But the best thing that I can say is that there is help out there and you should seek advice. I know through our hotline calls, sometimes we get people in our community that call and just say, I need information. I don't necessarily want to come and live at your shelter, but I do need information. They want to know, they don't even know sometimes if they're being abused. They want information. They want to be able to speak to someone so they can process what's happening and be able to make a good decision for themselves.
Okay, Shay, and that leads to another question. How do shelters balance finding a way to accommodate the victim's safety needs and yet allow them to have their independence?
That's a very good question. Safety is always a concern. We believe in empowering our survivors, and so at our shelter there are no curfews, if you will. We're considered what you call the load-bearing shelter, so the woman has the opportunity and the flexibility to come and go as she pleases. But what we do is that we ensure that every woman and child who comes into our shelter is awarded with a safety plan, and it is customized to their specific life experiences and their situation. And we even go so far as to have safety plans that are customized to the child. One of the things that I like to tell people when I talk about the safety plan is that we would never expect a 6-year-old to respond in an emergency situation the same way a 30 or 40-year-old would. So we have 2 separate customized plans, one for the woman and one for the child. And so thank you so much for asking that question. It's a really good question because safety is always a priority for us, for our staff, and for our participants. I'll share this statistic that is one of the most daunting statistics that I've heard so far when it comes to domestic violence, and that is that a woman is 70 times more likely to lose her life or be murdered by her abuser in the weeks after leaving the abusive relationship. So imagine having the courage to finally walk out of an abusive relationship and then being murdered several weeks into that revelation that this is not a situation or a relationship that I want to be in. Imagine finally having the courage and the support and the resources to flee that situation and ending up in that detriment. 70 times more likely to lose her life at the hands of her survivor after she leaves the relationship.
Wow. Wow. Kenneth, you got a question?
Yes, good evening. I do have a question. My question is, if you are an ongoing witness of domestic violence, you do not report it, will charges be if it is reported and it's found that you are a witness?
I could not hear that question. If it was directed towards me, Kenneth, you were chopping in and out.
I'm sorry. Let me just make sure everything is good. All right. So yes. So my question was, if you are an ongoing witness of domestic violence and you choose not to report it, when the police end up going to your house, whenever they realize that there is violence happening in your household, will all witnesses be charged with those same domestic violence charges, or will you not? That's just my question. I hope you understand.
That might be a question better for Mr. Harper, but that's not necessarily the case. Not all witnesses will be charged because they didn't report it to the police, because many of the people who are in the household who are witnessing the violence are also being abused, or they are tormented and afraid. So sometimes a woman might see that her child is being abused by the father or stepfather and does nothing because she's under constant intimidation. And that's a real fear, even if he never lays a finger on her. We have a video that we use for our training for when we onboard new employees. And the video features a lady who was married to a man, and he hit her once in their 20-year marriage, 20 years. And it happened on Thanksgiving Day. He beat her so badly that they had to cancel Thanksgiving dinner. And he stood by her side while she picked up the phone and called every family member and told them that she wasn't feeling well and that she had stomach aches and she needed to cancel. He never hit her again in the 20-year marriage. But every time he was unhappy with her, he'd put his finger in her face and say, "Remember Thanksgiving dinner. Remember what I did to you." That's domestic abuse. He only hit her one time. So you don't necessarily have to be the person being physically hit to be also experiencing the abuse. And I think, to Mr. Harper's point, I think any good officer of the law who arrives at a domestic violence call should usually be able to discern what's happening. They have a good
Detective, you want to ad lib or step in this?
Yes, the person that doesn't want to say anything and know is not charged. That's one of the reasons why when I do teach the class for law enforcement coming into the sheriff's office, I tell them when you go to the neighbor's house, have your recorder on, because a lot of times they'll tell you what's going on, but they don't want to have anything to do with it because they have to live there. So that speaks the same volumes even to the victim or the children. So a lot of times we have to get them away from the situation to be able to get them to talk. But no, the victim, the witnesses that don't come forward won't be charged, anything like that. So we haven't had anything like that I'm aware of, but no, that won't happen.
Okay, Jada, what's your question?
Hi, I actually have two questions, but why do victims sometimes return to or stay with the abuser, and is it possible for abusers to change?
Well, that's good.
Okay, that's going to be Sabrina. That's one of your questions. Why do victims sometimes return or stay with the abuser?
That's amazing because I just highlighted that and I sent you a message that I wanted to respond. So
Yep.
Jada, amazing thought process. If I could, I also just wanted to offer to Kenneth that you also want to consider your role inside of these situations because we lean heavily to identifying protective caregiver capacities. So if you are in the environment and you're witnessing these situations, if you are parental or guardian or someone who should be protecting the children, this can cause you adverse considerations if you do not step up and intervene. And the way of reporting now with the anonymous aspect of it and all the different things that you can do, it's more relaying information than you being directly involved, but herein lies the DCF cases and different things that materialize. So I just wanted to add that caveat. But for Jada, I want to say to you, and I want to emphasize that all victims are not weak. I think it's important for us to understand that abusers are dominant. They're persistent. They are driven by impulses that they cannot control. Mental illness is there. Addiction is there. So we never look at a victim as being weak. We're looking at the circumstances as being very, I guess, overpowering in a sense, in a way. So it renders an individual to try to reason through a situation that's not always easy to manage. And victimization is tolerated. And we have to be honest about that, looking at family dynamics, the turning of the head, the covering of the eyes, the acceptance just alone by not saying or doing anything. So within the family, it becomes like second nature. We don't have the exploratory and explanatory conversation. When was the last time you gathered your family and talked about mental illness and pain? When was the last time you gathered and talked about services or intervention that you know is needed? Instead of being reactive to a situation, we should be more proactive. We don't access and maximize, our resources. There are so many different resources. I'm even learning about some things tonight inside of what I would do as referral points. But showing up for these community forums, there should be hundreds of people involved in them. The information access highway is generous in this regard. But also too, when a victim is contemplating their exodus, I did it 10 years ago. And I want to tell you, inside of safety planning and everything else, it was one of the most complicated and tedious decision-making processes I've ever engaged. We had a home, we had cars, we had life together, we had children. I spent time in shelters and I was trying to figure out how to get back home and pay bills and keep the house afloat and everything else. So looking at a situation as far as leaving and even returning, a lot of times it's the individual's ownership inside of the situation and how he or she views that. But it also has a lot to do with the environmental surroundings. So,
Excellent, Sabrina. Okay, these questions are really good. More youth. Any other questions that you all have that you want Sabrina and the rest of the panel to answer? Mr. Franklin.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I want to thank you all so far for a very enlightening discussion. I have a couple of questions for Detective Harper. Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for the efforts that you work in this area is very important. And thank you for your time and your efforts here. First question, how does Pbso tie domestic violence back into its everyday regime as working with the community? How do you advocate? How do you support and help those families? And they're all are not Black. They're all are not one color. That they come across the whole gambit. How does Pbso take that effort to try to do some prevention?
We do have victim advocates at the sheriff's office, and every, I'll call it a level 2 call meeting, victim services not involved, our advocates reach out to the victim. We encourage, even if there's not an actual physical battery, even if it's a verbal dispute, that you can still put information into our database, and our victim advocate will actually call them and offer them services and see what kind of needs that they have, direct needs that they have, whether it's clothing. We do what we can. We connect them to different agencies as far as like YWCA and Silo, different places like that. But the advocate actually takes the lead in that area, but also too, before COVID, we were doing those anytime they have the National Night Out Against Crime. Domestic violence has a booth that we set up on purpose because it's people come around and sometimes they'll pull people to the side and speak. So we try to reach the community through our advocates, also through officers, again, because every officer has to, again, go through the class in which I tell them that, again, treat it as a crisis. So even if you're not at that house, you can be in the grocery store and encounter someone with a question in reference to that, to deal with it, not to run from it. So we encourage that, but most of our links are coming from the partnerships that we have in our victim advocates. And like I said, the class that every officer that comes into the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office must go through, 8-hour block, is strictly domestic violence because it's the #1 call and it's a crisis, and we know that. So we teach that to the point where, hey, reach out. Don't be that guy or that girl to push them off, because it's going to come back in some avenue and affect some community and affect the child or a mother or a son.
Second question. Reverend Thickland, in his opening remarks, very vividly talked about the impact of domestic violence on our kids, on the families, the ability to be in school, the ability for families to even provide for their families, because domestic violence takes away sometimes their job. You boots on the ground. You are right there in the action. Talk to us a little bit about how you've seen kids being adversely affected by the effects of domestic violence.
Well, a lot of times, and unfortunately, the school teachers see that hands-on because a lot of times they display what they're seeing. And then it starts in the school, and then you got school resource officers that are there, have to deal with that. Charter schools have to deal with that. And then after that happens, and then they come home, and then you got siblings fighting amongst each other, and then law enforcement is called. So it brings it all into that. So children are direct in their school. Think about it, their grades are affected because of the fact that there is a cry for help, but in a different manner, and they don't understand the concept of it. And so they display it at school, they display it in the neighborhoods, and then law enforcement is called. They're out doing stuff they shouldn't be doing because they're looking for that love attention that they're not getting, and then they're trying to figure out what's going on at home at the same time. So it affects the children directly. Again, as we're talking today, every adult was once a child. So as we can see now how it has affected children that become adults. And if we don't start to realize the crisis of the whole thing, that's why we keep having the erosion, or we keep having people going through these cycles that won't break, because mama was beat, then mama, and it passes on because nobody intervenes. And that's why it's important. I harp on this for law enforcement as a whole, that we treat this as a crisis and treat them with respect, because a lot of times it's what we say, what we do, how we respond to them. Can say, well, I ain't calling them no more. I've had people say that too. I've actually had to deal with even kids or parents say that to me. And I say, I'm not that guy or that girl you dealt with. Give me the opportunity. So we have to directly face on and treat it as a crisis, especially dealing with our children, because if not, they're going to grow up and become that which we don't want them to become.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir. Is there someone on here who has a question, who is in school, who has a question about what they are seeing in school? Okay, let's go to Justin.
Hi, my question was, do abusers show any potential warning signs?
Sure.
Who wants to talk about warning signs?
Well, I'll definitely say that there are what we call flares. There are usually some level of indication that something is not just so. And a lot of times it's easier to give an example of such. So I'll do that very briefly. and within the 6 months of my interacting with my former abuser, I saw a lot of signs of dishonesty. I saw a lot of signs of escalation, temper issues, and things of that nature, which ultimately culminated into him burning me with a cigarette lighter after an argument. That was a flare. There was a clear indication. I would learn later that there was functioning alcoholism, there was substance dependence, a lot of things that I did not know what was going on, but there was a lot of signs. So I always encourage individuals to become educated and to ask questions, and especially if there is an abnormalcy, so that you understand what you're working with. But yes, there are typically signs, and a very important caveat here is if we choose to be honest about what we're seeing or if we deny and ignore. Because that's what I did initially. The honeymoon phase comes around, he apologizes, he loves on you, and you're right back at it again. And then there are other signs which eventually escalate. So the answer to that is absolutely yes. But it's very important that you understand what you're seeing and ask questions and explore the situation further.
Thank you for that. Any other young person on here in school or recently out of school who has a question for a panelist? Diamond Rose?
Hi, my question is, are men often victims of domestic violence?
I'll take that one. Men can certainly be victims of domestic violence, but to be transparent, to answer your question, the answer is no, not often. More than 90% of abusers are actually men, and that is directed towards women, unfortunately. So again, it's not that men cannot be abused, but 90% of the abusers are men, and it is directed towards women. Now with more same-sex relationships, we're beginning to see a shift in that. But to answer your question, the answer is no.
Detective Harper, when you are called to the scene, how are men responding when they are victims of domestic violence, be it from someone in a same-sex relationship or opposite-sex relationship? Are men willing to report? Because when it comes to even looking at data as a journalist, people will mention numbers and I'll say, well, there's underreporting. You always face that reality. Are you dealing with that on the beat?
Well, I would say this, when I was actually, I've worked the case of two guys, but yes, they're not as quick to want to be forthcoming on that. So, but what happens though, also too, that of course, she was right on with as far as women being our, number one victim, unfortunately. But guys, they do, a lot of times, they'll have some issues going on, but they won't say anything, and then get to the point where now they get angry. I've had it before in the past when I was on regular road patrol, where she hit me first, and then she calls later because he hit her. One of those, and then he's upset, like, well, I should have called on her. Now I'm going to jail, when she actually may be the initiator of the whole situation. But they feeling the macho, I ain't gonna call, that's my girl or whatever. And I've had to take girls to jail. And of course, the guy now, he wants to flip the script on me. At the end of the day, that's why you guys spoke about it earlier, being very dangerous for us, because the minute you come in to help, and then once the mind start clicking another way, then they can turn against us. But men are not forthcoming when it comes to that. They're kind of on the back end of that. You will have some guys come forward and say, yeah, this has happened. I've had cases while I'm in the unit that actually helped the guy out, and he still calls me now because unfortunately his wife got some underlying medical issues, mental issues, and so he's been abused by her, and they have a child together. So, but he came forward. I was happy that he did. I actually, dealing with a jail call concerning that, but it's one of those things where men can be victims, not often, but when you find a man coming forward, most of the time it's something really serious, or there is a child involved. I notice men are more shifted when there's a child involved and they're in their child's life when they're being victimized.
Absolutely. Got it, which leads to another question. Other than growing up with it, why do you think that the abuser wants to harm their spouse? Anyone on the panel can look at this. I mean, there's a lot of intersectionality that you all have brought up, over the last over 1 hour. So why is this?
Well, I'm going to say, if I may jump in at that point there, once again, we're talking about power and control. And we're also talking about, our belief system. We all operate from a belief system. Our belief systems are formed by events, education, experiences of life. So if I understand the way to achieve what I want is to be aggressive, is to be manipulative, is to exert force. If I get what I want by doing that, then I do it because in my mind it's successful. And so I do so in doing so. And I might not see the fact that I'm necessarily hurting that person. I'm seeing it from the aspect that I'm getting what I want. The person just happened to be hurt in the process. And so that's one of the reasons why, when I don't know another way or I choose not to learn another way, once again, I go with the fear, the domination, the control. Ultimately, when we can get what we want. Number one reason, why do we perpetrate? Because we can.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you, Doctor. What are the adverse effects of domestic violence and abuse on family systems, intergenerational trauma, and also, Dr. Thickland, we talk about curses, family curses, generational curses. That's can we break that down when it comes to domestic violence? Sabrina, you could also, jump in on this one as well if you want to.
Yeah, there's two levels of that. We really use that term generational curses, and we use it very loosely, especially in the faith world. And basically what we're really saying is the fact is that basically it's the passing down of behaviors. It's the passing down of actions and mindset. Now, what has happened, science have caught up with exactly what we said. We talk about epigenetics. And so epigenetics, once again, we see, Sabrina talked about earlier about genetic coding and those type of things. We see that it's being played out. It is literally being transformed from one generation to the other. And oftentimes this has happened because there has not been intervention. There's been definitely, the lack of intervention. So when you talk about unattended trauma, unattended situation, we learn what we live, then we live what we learn.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. Ms. Rose, you got a question? All right, how about Pamela? You have a question? You got your hand up? Okay, there we go. Ms. Rose, you have a question?
Hello, hi. My question is, how long does a domestic violence charge stay on your record?
Detective, do you have an answer for that? Are there layers to domestic violence charges?
Well, you have, unfortunately, if you're not a juvenile, unless you commit a heinous crime, your record is your record, unfortunately, until you leave here, because you have misdemeanor charges that'll be on your record, and also you have felony. And unfortunately, some people have long line of that in their file as far as their record is concerned. But also, too, if a person that have more than one conviction of that, it can up it to a felony. So that's a part of they keep that and have that on the books for laws. But if a person has a misdemeanor on their record for domestic battery, it'll be on their record. And so it's one of those things where they have to have that on there for the sake of, unfortunately, if a person can turn around, but at the end of the day, you still need to have record of that, because it's just unfortunately like a driving record. It's not like after 7 years, something falls off. No, this doesn't fall off. Your record is your record. So I advise anybody to say, listen, try not to get yourself in trouble like that. To stop yourself. Now, I've had people that have get jobs with misdemeanors on their record, even domestic. But just know that that record is your record.
Wow, that record is your record. You hear that? Okay, Kenneth, you got a question?
Yes, this one's, it's a bit more personal, not with me, but with someone that I know. So how do we exactly help individuals that, that are basically stuck in an abusive relationship? And I'll just say this to clarify. a particular individual that I know, the police are at their house every single day, if not twice a day. And I believe that the police are very much aware of what's going on, but it seems as though it is a loop where one is either abusing the other, but when it's time to separate, then the guardian does not want to let go of her child. And then, there's issues with the law, and, there's a loop. Me personally, I think the only way that I can affect this person is intermingle with them, or to talk to them as friends. So if we know someone that is in an abusive relationship and is stuck, as you can say, so how would we be there to support them, being that the law won't really do much about it?
And it's the best way to support someone who's experiencing domestic abuse, because you can't force them to leave, and they won't leave until they're ready, if they're ever ready. And someone mentioned earlier in the conversation, or one question was, why do survivors go back to their abusers? And it does happen for many reasons, but the best course of action is to make sure they have access to information. They need to speak with a professional who's going to provide the information that they need so that they can make an informed decision. At YWCA, we don't make decisions for survivors. We only present information and we give them guidance. Many of our survivors move on to be very, very successful, but some do go back to their abusers. They do. Some come to us for help and we see them again in 6 months, or we see them again in a year. And there's no judgment, but the idea is that we continue to support them. We give them the resources and the tools, and we give them access to information. So eventually they'll make their own decision. And that is the absolute best and only way.
Wow, our arsenal is so much stronger. Don't y'all feel better? All this information that came out today. I want all of our panelists to put your contact information inside that chat box so everyone can have it. That way you can continue on this conversation. I also want to bring in Mr. Franklin. Are you ready to come on now? This is a lot. I'm inspired and more educated moving forward right now. Pastor RJ? Pastor Thickland?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, is there anything that you want to say right now moving forward as we look at what's next in terms of these community conversations?
Absolutely. Again, I want to thank all those panelists who gave their expertise and gave their knowledge and understanding. I really want to make sure that Detective Harper, I want to thank you for giving us the guidance and the input and the interaction that you have towards this issue that I think is so prevalent in our communities. You made a statement said that is your number one call, and we need to make sure that we understand that beyond anything else, domestic violence, and even when it comes to mental health, those two things go hand in hand. And all too often, our police officers are called for these two occurrences, and not for criminal activity, but they're called for domestic violence, and mental health issues. So I want to thank you for giving your input and your interaction with us. We're going to be moving forward with several other topics that are in major discussion in our community when it comes to so many different things. But stay tuned with us, because you're going to be hearing from us on a monthly basis on issues that really affect the daily lives of our community, our residents, and really has an adverse effect on us that we need to do better, that we can do better. So Reverend Thickland, as always, thank you for your knowledge and expertise. You are definitely the one that we turn to when we talk about domestic violence. You are renowned throughout this country and throughout the world on domestic violence. And I want to thank you for your time, and everyone else. Arthur Mondale, thank you for guiding and leading us through this. We appreciate your knowledge and help with this. And like I said before, look at what's coming up. Gun violence, December 1st. Human trafficking on December 15th. We're going to do school bullying, school violence, bullying, police responding to the schools and Baker Act in here. When you look at the Baker Act in the school district of Palm Beach County, one of the highest in the country, not in the state, in the country. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to help our kids who have no choice in the matter? Before you know it, they're being Baker Act. Racial injustice, arrest, incarceration, traffic pullover, profiling, that's in February. Gang violence in April. And then police diversity and recruiting and hiring. And how do the police who live and work within our community, what do they look like? Do they look like the people who live there? So when we look at all these different areas, that each and every one of these are absolutely at the top of our priority list here in Palm Beach County. Now, I want to make sure that everybody understands. Tell a friend, give them this information, because I don't want to see 80 plus people on the call. I want to see 80 times 3 people on these calls to really get engaged and see. Our work here at the Urban League is about educating, bringing awareness, and making sure that people understand there are options. There are better ways for you to live and understand why we're being affected by so many different issues. We can help each other. We can help ourselves. Everyone, reach out and help someone. Reach out and help someone, because everybody needs help somewhere down the line. Arthur, thank you very much. Everybody else, have a great evening. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome job, people. Awesome job. Very, very informative, very well put together. I'm honored to have shared this time with you all. Wow. I do hope that this can be reproduced. I do hope it can be edited and reproduced. I think it's a good teaching tool if you can package it and get it out to the right places. I think that it covered a great deal. Listen, then I pray that we can clone everybody so that this can be all over the place, but that might be a prayer that may be delayed. But most definitely, awesome job. What can I say, Art? Listen.
That was really, really good, Pastor. I mean, I appreciate everything.
You're the journalist.
And look how that, sir, look how that's evolved. I had no idea how impactful you going to one church and then another and another and another. You broke barriers. You went against the norm. You went against the status quo. And so I just commend you, respect you. You're a pioneer, sir. You really, and you are such an asset to this region. You know, you really, really are. You're changing life. What message do you tell those who are younger who want to go? Because I just thought of a question as we were wrapping. What about the young person who wants to go into this industry? I mean, COVID has made you redefine how exactly do you use the practicum to reach the public. You know what I mean? So what about these young folks with these new trends? What should they expect going into this field? Who's the right person?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say this. I want to say shout out to the Urban League again. I'm going to be shameless plug. My beautiful daughter, Japricia, who works with the Urban League, and I know she works with those young people, and they were there. And I'm telling you, they asked some incredible questions, insight. So the thing I'm going to say, because I'm reading some of the comments, some of them saying they will never forget this because of the information. So we need to utilize them in being able to use their medium of communication, whether it's TikTok or whatever other social media, being able to create videos and little, snippets where they now can reach their community and their peers in a way that this makes sense, because it made sense to them what they heard. And I think that that's what we have to build upon. And once again, the Urban League is a great place to start because they have national award-winning programs.
Yes, sir. That's it. Wow. You always end us good, whether it's here, whether it's the in crowd. You always know what to say, Pastor.
Listen, we are surrounded by great people.
Ladies and
Sue-Ann.
gentlemen, good evening, and thank you so much, JR and Arthur, Sabrina, Shay, and all of those who participated.
Detective
Vance
Harper.
Harper.
I mean,
You guys did a
wow.
phenomenal job. And with that being said, we're going to say goodnight, and we'll see you at the next forum.
Okay, we don't have to go home, but we got to get out of here, right? Thank you.